So it's been a while since I made a video. There's been a lot of life that's happened since then, since the last video at least. I think we had a baby since the last time I made a video. We've kind of worked our way through the other side of the pandemic. I've been in class teaching, so a lot of that has absorbed my time, and I haven't had a lot of extra time to devote to offering resources for others. So now that I'm on summer break from teaching, I thought that I might try to catch back up and make a few videos on some questions I get asked a lot, or things that I was thinking through when I first started my journey in photography, or just basic suggestions that can help you as you progress in your art. So as I teach a lot of new photographers, I find that there are buzzwords that are used about pictures that annoy me, or that don't fit the form very well. So today I want to talk a little bit about, is photography art? Or rather, when is it art and when is it not? So I've got a couple of ideas on this subject matter, and I'm going to show some examples maybe to help give some context. But oftentimes I hear words in class like artsy or artistic or whatever, and typically that just means the person doesn't quite know what they're looking at. And I find also that people use that term art and they kind of just blanket cast it over things, anything that is mildly creative. But things that are creative aren't necessarily art. And there are a lot of categories of things that don't qualify as art, but they're still pivotal to photography as a form, photography as a medium. So let's get into a few of those possible forms that I think are very common. So I'm going to talk about 4 today, and of course there are more, and we could subdivide these probably 100 times over. But these are the main ones I think that we tend to deal with, or I tend to deal with on a regular basis. So the first one that I think is the most common, or the one that we relate to kind of societally as a whole in a large sense, is that of commemorative pictures. And so a commemorative picture would be like a snapshot at a family reunion, or a picture on your phone of your kids, or something that I call these commemorative pictures, are the pictures that you would hang on your refrigerator. Now, when I was growing up, that was a really common practice. Our refrigerator was also always full of pictures and things on it. I love going to people's houses and looking at their images on their refrigerator, but these images I think are precious, but aren't necessarily well composed or have some deeper meaning or anything like that. They're really personal, and I think that commemorative photos are just as valuable as art photos, depending on who you are and what they mean to you. So images that are commemorative are really going to be common for a lot of people, and definitely there are art pictures that dip their toe into commemorative pictures and imaging. I'm not really talking about that specifically. I'm talking about just strictly photos that you would keep for yourself, that would be in family albums or personal things, or vacation pictures, snapshots you make on vacation, all of those types of images. The second type of imagery that is really common is what I call decorative photos. Now, this might rub some people the wrong way, and again, this is just my opinion and my thoughts as a practicing photographer and as a teacher, that decorative photos are pictures of like flowers and beaches and sunsets. They might be mildly pleasing to look at, but they don't really ask anything of us as a viewer. A lot of times decorative photos are just meant to occupy wall space. They're meant to fill a gap on the wall. So if you go to Hobby Lobby or Kirkland's or any place like that, Target, that's the type of images that you'll see. And I find that a lot of photographers are really drawn to making decorative pictures. People that are, strictly landscape photographers, whatever that means. They're looking for some composition that looks pleasing to the eye, and that's kind of the transaction is over, transaction done. Now, these images aren't necessarily bad, but they're not art. And I think these images specifically are really confused with art and what is considered art, because they are usually somewhat well composed or well lit. The subject matter is nice to look at, and I think that generally, for average folks, normal people on the street, they just assume that art is just something that's nice to look at. But I want to maybe take that a little further and a little deeper to why, for instance, something like the Mona Lisa has lasted the test of time, but maybe a picture from the Grand Canyon won't. So, okay, let's keep moving forward. Don't get bogged down in the decorative thing. I mean, I would love to hear feedback on this. And again, I'm not saying that there's a hierarchy of better or worse qualitative images. I just think those categories serve a specific purpose, and decorative pictures are for decoration. That's their purpose. That's what they're meant to do. The third possible image making category that I think is really common, and this is where my background is actually, is what I would call either journalistic or historic. Those I think could be used interchangeably, but they don't necessarily have to be. So of course these types of images are pivotal in how we think about history, how we consider our place in time, how we consider our place in culture. But these images don't necessarily have to be well composed. They don't necessarily have to be well lit. They're really just making a record. So if you crack open a newspaper, depending on the quality of the photography, you're going to see a journalistic image. Now, whether that image is a great picture or not, I don't know. I mean, it could be. I mean, if you're reading something like the New York Times or something of that, echelon of newspaper, yeah, you're probably going to see some really well-composed, really nice-looking images. But the chief goal of the image is to illustrate very clearly a time and a place and an idea. They're very illustrative in nature. And oftentimes, journalistic and historic images tend to serve the writing. They tend to serve specifically something else. They're meant to illustrate text. And I do not consider these images to be art. Now, definitely, again, art can live and can overlap these other spaces. And definitely, as a practitioner, I tend to probably overlap the space of journalism with my art practice the most out of all the other categories. But it's important to remember that journalistic images are vital to our culture, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's something deeper going on there. And as a practitioner myself, and as coming from, I came from a photojournalism background, I found these limitations to be very stifling. But I still do journalistic work. I do work for the New York Times and a few other publications. But again, those images I wouldn't consider something that are representative of my practice. Now, the final category, which I think is maybe one of the more difficult ones to explain, is that of what makes an art image. What makes a photograph art? And this is obviously a very debated topic, and there are people that don't consider photography to even be capable of art, and there's many grades in between. I think, as a general rule, something that qualifies as art, no matter the medium, is something that either allows us to transcend our current moment in some way. So when we see an image, I remember the first time I saw a Van Gogh, not the actual painting, not a duplication or something in a magazine or a book. I remember when I saw that, I felt like I had left my body for a brief moment. There was something, it's like I took a step back from the world for a second. And I think if we look at art that has lasted time for hundreds of years, a lot of it has that quality. It in some way transcends itself, and we could spend hours on each individual piece and talking about why that might be. But in my mind, that is one category, one way that something's qualified as art. Now, that's a very high bar to meet, definitely. I don't necessarily know that I've ever achieved something that at that level, maybe an image that allowed someone to transcend their reality for a moment. I think another way that we could qualify something as art is visuals or imagery or something that asks something of us. It doesn't tell us something, it asks something of us. And I think this is a great entry point for art making, because what it asks of us could be many, many things. And I always encourage my students that, like, images that ask something of the viewer, that invite the viewer in to explore and to question, not to support their own beliefs or reality, but to question their own understanding of whatever that subject matter might be, that's getting towards art. It's not illustrative like a historic or journalistic image. A journalistic image, again, kind of does the opposite. It tells us on the front end, like, this is what it is. This is a picture of a duck. That is a duck. An artistic image, or an image that is art, asks the viewer to doubt whether that is a duck or if a duck exists that way. And those are two very different things. Now, definitely art has different modes, and I mean, I live in the kind of documentary type of world of making work that relies a lot on what is seen and when I'm walking around in my life. And it definitely visually tends to look very journalistic at times. But my hope is always that, like, I'm asking something of the viewer to spend time with this, to question their reality, or to ask questions about what they're seeing, or to meditate or to contemplate what they're looking at. I think great art doesn't reinforce our presuppositions, it causes us to doubt our presuppositions. That's something that a friend of mine, I learned from in graduate school. Jürgen Kohlberg, was very persistent about that, and I that really resonated with me, especially as a failed journalist. Art imagery demands a lot more from the viewer, and because of that, it may not have as wide of an appeal as something that's decorative, because a decorative image doesn't demand something from the viewer. Art, it asks something, but I would say that if you're open and you're willing to get lost in something, to allow something to ask questions of you, it has a staying power. It lives with you. It does a service to you as the viewer. One thing I love about making art is watching someone interact with it and make it their own. It becomes personal to them because they have been asked a question. They have been involved in that process. They have been implicated in this work that has nothing to do with them. And I think there's something so beautiful about that invitation, that when you see a piece that really moves you in a deep way, no matter what that is, whether it's a photograph or a painting or a sculpture or a piece of music, I think music is an easy one to correlate this with. A song that it just runs through your head over and over and over, and it causes you to leave yourself for a moment. I mean, that's good art. That's great art. And so I know a lot of people disagree with me on what constitutes as art, but I think in the most basic level, I think that's really what makes good art. And if you're reflective and you take time to look at the history of art and the things that really have lasted, you'll see that those types of things continue on, and those types of things resonate in culture. And I would also always invite you to, if you get a chance to see a piece, see it in person. Seeing a duplication of a piece, like when I saw the Van Gogh, it was not the same. Seeing a representation of a piece of art is not the same as seeing the piece. Making a photograph or photography is a strange thing because it is infinitely duplicatable. Like, we can show it on a screen or on paper or in a book, which is different than a painting or a sculpture. And so it comes with its own bit of problems or opportunities. And I think that one thing I love about photography is it is very accessible visually, that you don't necessarily have to be in a museum to see a great piece of art, that you could have a book or a small print. I would say seeing it on a screen, typically, I mean, a lot of people, the only way they see my work is on a screen, so I'm appreciative of that. But I think seeing something at scale is really helpful too. So I would love to talk more about this subject matter. Definitely haven't totally figured it out, but those are just some subcategories that I think that if we really are reflective, we'll find a lot of photography fits into one of those categories. And I also don't want to diminish any of those categories because they all serve an important purpose in culture, in society. Personally, I mean, there's many commemorative pictures that I have at home that are so valuable and important to me, and I would never show them at a gallery, but that doesn't mean that they're less valuable or they're less important. So I think I want to just honor those people that do those different things. Maybe I am not a decorative photographer, or I don't work as a journalist or work in a historic sense anymore, but those things are valuable. It's just different. It's not art. And art also is not better or greater or smarter than anything else. You know, I think there's a lot of people that lord over others that I understand art and I am so educated. And I think if you need a graduate degree to understand a piece of art, then it's not good art. I love art that is accessible to everyone and also invites people to question or understand their own lives, no matter where they come from, no matter their belief systems, no matter what their financial situation is or their educational situation. I think that's great art, and that's another thing that photography I think is really nice because it's not scary. To look at a picture, it's not scary. So if you have questions, please reach out. My email or comments or whatever is easiest. I'll do my best to try to have a reasonable answer for you. And thanks for watching.